You know, the AIDS, the HIV epidemic in Australia was only controlled when a particular troika took charge. And they were the poofters, junkies and whores, weren't they? And today we're talking about the junkies. But we shouldn't forget that it was only when they took charge that Australia got on top of things. And we don't forget that in New York City they managed to get 40% of drug users HIV positive. That took some doing. The other thing, and Mary mentioned this, government supports NUAA. If we had two big posters up, one saying support children with cancer and one saying support junkies, which do you think the public would give money to? And the same thing with trickle down. Some people are fond of the benefits we're going to get from trickle down effects on economy. You mentioned how much money would intravenous drug users receive? They'd get none. So Mary's right that there is a role for government in attending to things that would otherwise get neglected. And I accept that government's got to do that. Now, the war on drugs was introduced by Richard Nixon in the early 1960s, and it's been lost. The only trouble is that those who are in decision-making positions won't admit that it's been lost. The same as the Iraq War's been lost. Jenny and I recall that once we were driving John Howard's drug supremo to a meeting on Central Coast somewhere, and Jenny said to him, shouldn't we care for people who are using drugs? Shouldn't we care for them and keep them alive and well? Some of them will mature out in 10 years, but it doesn't matter if they don't. And he said, oh, Jenny, you don't understand. There are worse things than death. That's what he actually said. Now, how can you really cope when those are the kind of attitudes that are entrenched in the society among powerful people? Of course, he was scarred by alcohol in his family, and that's still the substance that causes most trouble in Australia. We know that, don't we? But, I mean, most policies have got costs and benefits too. And policies directed towards illicit drugs are no different. I mean, there are costs to the current system. Come back to some of those. But there are benefits too. And they include the fact that every time the Customs Service finds a shipment of drugs, they're drugs that won't appear on the street. Probably. Every dealer who's in jail means one distribution network is interrupted. And every time they find an illicit drug factory and they close it down, well, that's one source of production that's been interrupted. But there are costs as well, and they really outweigh any of the benefits. And the costs, well, you all know them. Expense, jails with too many drug users, mostly low-level people of that. I mean, the people who got executed in Indonesia were low-level people. They include considering drug users as bad people, something you mentioned that. That's one of the costs. There's corruption in our police, our customs, our magistracy, our prison systems, You know, once when they were developing a national policy, I was chairing a committee on intravenous drug use. And did you know that there was so much heroin in Pentridge Jail at one stage that they were exporting it back onto the streets of St Kilda for sale? You know, and so the costs also include a source of money for people like bikie gangs, and there are turf wars, and there are killings, and there's no rules or regulations, and there's no quality control, and they're things that too many people in authority just want to ignore. Now, my grandchildren tell me that there are drugs in every school that they attend, and I'm sure there are drugs in every school in this state. Just another thing we don't admit. But if we can't prevent importation and production and sale and use and corruption and the emergence of bikie gangs, then the laws we've got aren't working well enough. And the approach is expensive and it's damaging to people. Now, it's supported, of course, by those who built their careers on the current system, and of course it's supported by the criminals who are doing very nicely, thank you very much. The approach has had 50 years, at least 50 years. It's going to work. When's it going to work? It's just not working. So, and the users, our neighbours, our friends, our family, our children. Oh, there's no point hating people. Our job is to be there for people. Now, what I want is to re-examine the whole thing. I just don't think we could do worse than we're doing. And maybe we could do a bit better. Maybe we need some part of what they do now, but we may need it combined with more compassion and more treatment and more harm minimisation. Now, we used to do drug counselling, just what you were saying. We found that until people want to change or want to do something about it, till the window's open a bit, there's no point pushing them into some kind of program. And that's why compulsory diversion programs don't work, and they're not the answer. People don't want them, they won't work. Now, prohibition of alcohol didn't work over a century ago in the United States, and it led to the entrenchment of the mafia. For goodness sake, can't we learn from that? Now, the National Users and AIDS Association really cares about users. And we should identify with that caring. We could even address some of the underlying reasons behind drug use in the first place, but of course many politicians find that too threatening and too hard. But NUAA is seeking to do such valuable things, and we should support it in what it proposes. And we want to increase its capacity as an organisation to engage in campaigning and activism. Someone's got to speak out, and that's a very good organisation to start with. We want to highlight the connection between the punitive drug laws and the stigma and the discrimination that flow from them, flow from a lot of the attitudes in society, and we want to highlight some of the poor access to care that occurs. One time I had to go to Tonga, and I said, what would you do if you found someone who was HIV positive? They said, that's easy. We put a hole in their canoe, tell them to row out to sea. That's just how they dealt with their problems. We want media and public discussions to talk about Christian values. Now, I'm not a Christian, but the things I've read include the words tolerance, love, forgiveness, acceptance. They're not things we see in public policy in the drug area today. So I want to be concerned with those things and with harm reduction and with human rights. Now, only with those things can we frame properly and coherently the whole issue of how we're going to deal with drug use. And I commend NUAA and the people who work in it, and I can commend those people who've taken time to attend this meeting today. Thank you.